Why are we so uncomfortable as Christians with the notion of a Christian nation or a Christian coffee shop or Christian law? I mean, shouldn't Christians want Christian things? And then you see someone online being called a Christian nationalist, and we think, yeah, I don't want to become one of those. They sound pretty bad. And we can't think of a good biblical refutation, so we just slump back to our corner of personal, non-offensive, and non-active Christianity. But that's why we have this course, to get you back up on your feet. But before we answer the question of should Christians go Christianize society, we have to go back and answer a different question. Since about 2000, when the coexist era started, and we've all been being fed a bunch of this pluralistic doctrine that we should all just be quiet about our religions, live in harmony, and just take the secular humanist worldview as absolute truth. Wait a second here. Is a truly secular society actually a real thing? Most people today would answer, of course. We hear it all the time. Keep religion out of politics. Keep Christianity out of our schools. Faith is a private matter. The assumption behind all these statements is that there's another option, a neutral society where no belief shapes public life. But is that really possible? I mean, think about it. Every society is answering ethical and moral questions. They aren't optional. And once those answers are made, they become laws, school curriculums, cultural values, and public policy. So then the obvious question is, where did those answers come from? They don't just simply appear. No, they have to come from somebody's understanding of reality. You answer a moral question based on what you believe is true. In other words, it has to come out of a worldview. This is why I do not believe there can be such thing as a secular or a worldview neutral society. All societies are built on someone's view of ultimate authority. For some societies, that authority is the Bible. For others, it's the Quran. For others, it's secular humanism or the will of the people. But every society is built on something. Imagine somebody who's building a house saying, I don't want my house built on a concrete foundation. I want a neutral foundation. That isn't an option. If you remove the foundation, the house just won't float in midair. It will simply rest on something else. Societies work the exact same way. The question is not whether our societies are being shaped by a worldview. The question is always which worldview is shaping our society. But here's where many Christians make a mistake. We think that our participation in the political process should be worldview neutral, like we somehow should divorce our Christianity from our actions when we're going to vote. But absolutely no one does that. That's ingenuine. If you truly believe this and you're not going to vote this way, that's disingenuous. But oftentimes we believe our withdrawal is consideration. We believe that keeping our faith quiet somehow creates peace, but it doesn't. It just simply leaves the shaping of our cities to people who don't have a biblical grounding or people with insidious motives. So if our society is inevitably built on worldviews, then the next question becomes, what role should the Christian worldview play in our society? For many Christians, the answer seems obvious. Our goal as Christians is to focus on the sacred, the holy. We've divided our lives into two categories, the sacred and the secular. Church is sacred, prayer is sacred, evangelism is sacred, but government, that's secular. Work, that's secular, unless, of course, you work in a nonprofit or a Christian organization. Education, secular. Art, secular, etc., etc., etc. The goal, we've been taught to believe, is to keep these areas separate. But there's good reason for this, because we're trying to keep the sacred from being corrupted by the secular. And at first, that sounds wise, maybe even biblical. Protect the church, protect the gospel, protect Christianity. But what if we've misunderstood what makes something sacred in the first place? Throughout the Bible, holiness isn't about escaping ordinary life. It's about ordinary things being rightly ordered towards God, not because they're church activities, but because they've been devoted to God's purpose. The real question isn't, is this sacred or secular? The real question is is this part of my life submitted to the will of God? Because if it is, then it's set apart for Him and it belongs to Him. But here's where I think we've made the tragic mistake. We thought that separating the sacred from the secular would protect Christianity, but in reality, it has only confined it. We slowly reduced Christianity to church services, Bible studies, and Sunday morning, while quietly handing over the rest of life. Education, government, you name it. Not because Jesus said He didn't care about those things, but because we assumed that He didn't. And yet, listen to the very first word that Jesus speaks as He's giving the Great Commandment. All authority, heaven and in earth, has been given to Him. All authority. So what does this mean? This was never really a sacred or a secular problem. This was a lordship problem. We've been acting as though there's parts of creation that Jesus' lordship doesn't actually apply. But the thing is, Jesus never made this distinction. The sacred and the secular aren't divided by different kinds of work. They're divided by whether that work is joyfully ordered under the rule of Christ. A Christian doesn't become less Christian when he walks into his business. A husband doesn't become less Christian when he's at home spending time with his wife and kids. A contractor doesn't become less Christian when he picks up the hammer. These things are only secular in so much as they are decided to be work unto the Lord or work unto the world. But they're all under the authority of Jesus. Every part of our life becomes another opportunity to faithfully serve the King. The sacred was never meant to stay inside the church. In fact, Jesus commissioned us to go into the world. So if there's no such thing as a neutral society, and if the sacred and the secular aren't actually two different parts of life, then the next question follows. Why should Christianity be the religion that's shaping this? Shouldn't our faith be personal? Didn't Jesus care about a personal faith and personal belief in Him? Christians should simply proclaim the gospel and leave the rest of society out to everyone else. At first, it might sound humble, but it's not the claim that Christianity makes. Jesus never presented Himself as one religious option among many. He never proclaimed that He was offering just a better way to live. He didn't say, here's a philosophy that might work for you. No, He proclaimed that He is the way, the truth, and the life, and that all authority has been given to Him. So for example, imagine somebody came up to you and said, hey, I don't believe in the United States government. So you shrug and you say, okay, where are you going with this? And they continue, because I don't believe in the United States government, I'm not going to pay my taxes anymore. At this point, you probably smile. And why? Because whether they recognize the government's authority or not has absolutely no effect on whether that authority exists. Reality doesn't bend to our beliefs. Our beliefs have to bend to reality. This is the claim that Christianity is making. Jesus isn't somebody Christians choose to follow because His teachings merely improve their life. And Jesus claims to be the King. Whether people recognize Him or not, that does not change His authority. This is why Christianity can never remain a purely private faith. If Jesus were simply one religious teacher among many, then Christianity can remain private. But if Jesus truly possesses all authority, then that authority has to extend beyond my personal devotional life. I think this is where many Christians become confused. We often say, I don't want to force my beliefs on anyone. And that's good instinct. People can't really be forced to love Jesus. But somewhere along the way, we've confused us walking in the life God has for us with forcing them. And those aren't the same thing. Recognizing Christ's authority means living every part of our lives under the authority and dominion of the King. But confusing these two things is the reason why many Christians have withdrawn from having a public faith. We might call it humility. We might call it staying out of politics. We call it being considerate. But I think a lot of times what we call consideration is actually fear. Fear of confrontation, fear of being misunderstood, fear of breaking a friendship. But if Jesus is actually Lord, if He's actually the King, we can't remain silent about that. We don't want to be caught compartmentalizing His kingdom and saying, Jesus, I'm not willing to go into that area for your kingdom. Christianity was always meant to be a public declaration. Jesus said, "He who confesses me before men, I will confess before my Father." Not merely that Jesus saves, but Jesus reigns. So what does all this mean? Maybe after everything I've said, you're sitting there thinking, I guess I should just quit my job and become a pastor. But if that's your conclusion, ironically, you've actually missed the point completely. All you're wanting to do is go privatize Christianity again. Now you've just moved yourself into the place that you've always assumed is sacred. You're assuming that the highest expression of Christianity happens within the four walls of the church. This is exactly the sacred and secular divide we've been trying to dismantle. True Christianity doesn't produce Christians who just attend church. It produces Christians who follow Jesus in every area of your life. A lot of us think full-time ministry, man, that's the highest calling. We honor pastors, and sure, being a pastor is a hard job, but the job of the pastor is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. If you're not a professional Christian, it doesn't mean you're a second-class Christian. You're actually in the ministry. You're in the mission field. And this was the example we see throughout the Bible. Paul made tents. Lydia ran a business. Daniel served in government. Luke was a doctor. God has always called his people into ordinary vocation. Those jobs aren't less spiritual. These are actually the jobs where his kingdom can brush shoulders with people who are in the world and actually have an opportunity to influence them, to impact. So if your city is really secular, the answer isn't that you need more pastors, it's that you need more Christian electricians. God doesn't need fewer teachers and more missionaries. He just needs more Christian teachers. He definitely doesn't need fewer business owners and more church staff. He needs more Christian business owners. Christianity doesn't make everyone do the same job. It teaches all believers to do their God-given job as a follower and a witness of Jesus Christ. Your vocation is not an interruption to God's mission. It's the very place God intends his kingdom to become visible. So do not despise where God has planted you. Maybe it's a classroom. Maybe it's a construction site. Maybe it's a courtroom or your home. Healthy trees don't choose where they're planted. They simply bear fruit where they are. We don't want a Christianity that stays within the four walls of a church. We want one that flows into your marriage, that flows into your work, that flows into your kids' sports team, and then into your neighborhood, into your city. Cities don't become Christian by accident, nor by passing one law or the election of one politician. Cities change when Christians start becoming full-grown trees that are producing fruit. And that's exactly where we're going next.